Laura had always loved the idea of living alone. The freedom, the quiet, and the sense of independence were things she had longed for since her freshman year of college. So, when she found a charming one-bedroom apartment near her campus, she jumped at the opportunity. The rent was surprisingly affordable, and the place had a certain charm with its vintage woodwork and large windows that let in plenty of sunlight. The first few days were blissful. Laura enjoyed decorating her new space, arranging her books and plants, and soaking in the tranquility. But as night fell, a strange unease crept over her. She dismissed it as nerves from the big change and told herself it would pass. On the fourth night, as Laura was drifting off to sleep, she heard a faint whispering. She bolted upright in bed, heart pounding, and strained to listen. The whispers were so soft she couldn't make out the words, but they seemed to be coming from under her bed. She laughed nervously, attributing it to the creaks and groans of an old building, and tried to go back to sleep. Over the next week, the whispers became more persistent. Every night, just as Laura was about to fall asleep, they would start again. They were getting louder and more coherent, though she still couldn't understand what they were saying. She started feeling exhausted from lack of sleep and the constant sense of being watched. One night, Laura decided to confront her fear. Armed with a flashlight, she knelt by her bed and took a deep breath before lifting the dust ruffle. Her heart pounded in her chest as the beam of light cut through the darkness. But all she saw was a dusty floor and a few stray socks. She let out a shaky laugh, feeling silly for letting her imagination run wild. Determined to get to the bottom of the strange occurrences, Laura started asking around about the apartment's history. She learned from a neighbor that a young woman named Emily had lived there before her. Emily had been found dead in the apartment under mysterious circumstances, her body discovered under the bed. Laura's blood ran cold at the revelation. Could Emily's spirit still be lingering in the apartment? She needed answers, so she went to the local library and searched through old newspapers. She found an article about Emily's death. It mentioned that Emily had been involved in a secret relationship with a married man, and her death had been ruled a suicide, though many believed foul play was involved. That night, Laura couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the whispers. This time, she tried to focus on the words, hoping to understand them. Suddenly, the whispering stopped, and a cold breeze swept through the room. Laura felt a presence by her bed, and she forced herself to look. Standing there was the ghostly figure of a young woman. Her eyes were filled with sadness and fear. Laura's voice trembled as she spoke. "Emily, is that you?" The figure nodded slowly. Laura took a deep breath. "I want to help you. Please, tell me what happened." Emily's ghost began to speak, her voice a soft echo in the room. She revealed that she hadn't committed suicide. She had been murdered by the man she loved, who feared she would expose their affair. He had strangled her and hidden her body under the bed, hoping it would look like she had taken her own life. Laura knew she had to do something to bring Emily justice. She contacted the police and shared what she had learned, urging them to reopen the case. With the new information, they were able to find evidence that implicated the man in Emily's murder. He was arrested and brought to trial. The night after the arrest, Laura felt a sense of peace in the apartment for the first time in weeks. She lay in bed, waiting for the whispers, but there was only silence. She closed her eyes and felt a gentle breeze, as if someone was brushing a hand over her cheek. "Thank you," a soft voice whispered in her ear. Laura smiled, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. Emily's spirit had found peace, and Laura knew she had done the right thing. As she drifted off to sleep, she felt a newfound sense of safety and serenity in her little apartment. Tommy was an ordinary 8-year-old boy with an extraordinary fear of the dark. Each night, he insisted on leaving a small nightlight on, much to the frustration of his parents. They thought it was a phase he would eventually grow out of. Little did they know, Tommy had good reason to be afraid. One night, after his parents had tucked him in and turned off the light, Tommy lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He tried to ignore the creeping dread that always accompanied the darkness. Just as he was about to drift off, he felt something cold and slimy brush against his foot. He yanked his feet up and huddled under his blanket, too scared to move. The next morning, Tommy told his older sister Jessica about what had happened. Jessica, a pragmatic 13-year-old, didn't believe him at first. But when she saw the genuine fear in his eyes, she decided to investigate. That night, she stayed in Tommy's room, armed with a flashlight. They waited in silence, the darkness pressing in around them. Just when Jessica thought nothing would happen, she heard a faint rustling from under the bed. She turned on the flashlight and shone it under the bed, but saw nothing. Tommy clung to her, his eyes wide with terror. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Jessica started researching the house's history. She discovered that the previous owners had moved out after their young son disappeared without a trace. Local legend spoke of a creeping hand that emerged from under the bed at night, snatching children and dragging them into the darkness. Jessica was skeptical, but couldn't deny the fear in Tommy's eyes. She decided to take more drastic measures. She set up a camera in Tommy's room, hoping to catch whatever was lurking under the bed. The next morning, Jessica reviewed the footage. At first, it was just darkness and silence. Then, around midnight, the camera captured movement. A disembodied skeletal hand emerged from under the bed, its fingers crawling along the floor like a spider. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. This was no ordinary prank. She showed the footage to their parents, who were horrified but reluctant to believe in the supernatural. Jessica insisted they needed to do something before Tommy became the hand's next victim. Desperate for answers, they contacted a local historian who specialized in paranormal events. The historian, Mr. Harrison, visited their home and listened to their story. He explained that the house had a dark history. Over a century ago, a cruel man named Edward McAllister lived there. He was rumored to practice dark magic and was obsessed with eternal life. When the townspeople discovered his experiments, they lynched him, but not before he cursed the house, vowing to return from the dead. Mr. Harrison believed the creeping hand was all that remained of McAllister's spirit, still seeking revenge. The only way to stop it was to find his remains and give them a proper burial, breaking the curse once and for all. With Mr. Harrison's guidance, Jessica and her parents searched the property for McAllister's remains. They eventually found a hidden cellar beneath the house, containing old, decayed bones and a dusty book of dark rituals. That night, they performed a cleansing ritual with the help of Mr. Harrison. As they chanted, the ground began to tremble, and the skeletal hand emerged from the shadows, more desperate and aggressive than ever. But as the ritual continued, the hand's movements slowed, and it eventually crumbled to dust. The house felt different after that night later, as if a dark cloud had lifted. Tommy slept soundly for the first time in months, and the nightlight became a thing of the past. Jessica knew they had done the right thing, ensuring the spirit of Edward McAllister could no longer torment anyone. As they settled back into their normal routine, Jessica couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had faced her fears to protect her brother and uncovered a piece of their home's dark history. The creeping hand was gone, and the night was once again a time for rest, not terror. Sarah had always been a light sleeper, attuned to every sound her 6-year-old daughter, Emily, made in the night. Recently, though, Emily had been waking up with disturbing frequency, whispering to someone Sarah couldn't see. When Sarah would ask her who she was talking to, Emily would smile and say, "The night visitor." Sarah dismissed it as an imaginary friend, a common occurrence among children. But as the nights wore on, Emily's behavior grew stranger. She began drawing pictures of a tall, shadowy figure and insisted on leaving milk and cookies under her bed every night. Sarah grew increasingly concerned. One night, after putting Emily to bed, Sarah decided to investigate. She set up a small camera in Emily's room, hidden among her toys. She hoped to capture footage of Emily sleepwalking or some other explainable phenomenon. The next morning, Sarah eagerly reviewed the footage. At first, it showed nothing unusual, just Emily sleeping peacefully. But around midnight, the camera captured a dark shadow emerging from under Emily's bed. The figure was tall and indistinct, moving with an eerie fluidity. Sarah's heart raced as she watched the shadow bend over Emily, whispering something inaudible before retreating under the bed. Terrified, Sarah contacted a child psychologist, Dr. Amanda Reed, who specialized in childhood trauma and imaginary friends. Dr. Reed listened carefully to Sarah's account and reviewed the footage. She was skeptical, but agreed to visit their home to observe Emily and gather more information. That evening, Dr. Reed sat with Sarah and Emily, asking gentle questions about the night visitor. Emily described him as a tall, friendly man who told her stories and promised to protect her. Dr. Reed noted the unusually detailed description and decided to delve deeper into the house's history. Dr. Reed's research revealed that the house had a tragic past. Decades ago, a man named Jonathan Wells had lived there with his daughter, Clara. Jonathan was a loving father, but deeply troubled. After Clara's sudden death from illness, Jonathan became obsessed with the idea of bringing her back. He performed strange rituals and ultimately took his own life, believing he could join Clara in the afterlife. Dr. Reed theorized that Jonathan's spirit had lingered, seeking the companionship he had lost. Emily, sensitive to the supernatural, had become his new focus. Sarah was horrified, but determined to protect her daughter. That night, Sarah and Dr. Reed devised a plan to confront Jonathan's spirit. They set up the camera again and waited. As midnight approached, the familiar shadow emerged from under the bed. This time, Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "Jonathan, if you're here, please listen. Clara is gone. You need to move on." The shadow hesitated, then seemed to grow taller, more menacing. Emily woke up, her eyes wide with fear. Dr. Reed stepped in, her voice calm and authoritative. "Jonathan, let go of your pain. You don't belong here anymore." The shadow wavered, then slowly receded under the bed. The room grew colder, and a mournful wail echoed through the house. The presence faded, leaving an unsettling silence. Over the next few days, Emily's behavior returned to normal. She no longer spoke of the night visitor, and her drawings became cheerful again. Sarah, still shaken, continued to monitor Emily closely, but found no further signs of Jonathan's presence. Dr. Reed suggested they perform a cleansing ritual to ensure the spirit had truly departed. With the help of a local medium, they conducted the ritual, filling the house with light and positive energy. Life gradually returned to normal. Sarah was grateful for Dr. Reed's help and the support of the medium. She knew that Jonathan's spirit had been driven by love and loss, but she was relieved that Emily was safe. One evening, as Sarah tucked Emily into bed, Emily looked up at her with a serene smile. "Mommy, the night visitor is happy now. He's with his daughter." Sarah felt a chill but smiled, knowing Emily had found a way to understand and accept the events. The house felt lighter, and the nights were once again peaceful. Sarah watched her daughter drift off to sleep, grateful for the peace they had found. She knew that whatever had haunted their home was gone, leaving only the memories of a love that had transcended time and death. Story 4: The Portal to Nowhere. Jake had always been a bit of a loner, preferring the company of books and his own thoughts to the bustling life outside. When his great-uncle passed away, leaving Jake his old, creaky house, it seemed like the perfect escape from the pressures of college and social expectations. The house was a sprawling Victorian manor, filled with dusty furniture and forgotten memories. Jake spent his days exploring the many rooms, fascinated by the history that seemed to permeate every corner. One day, while cleaning out his bedroom, he found a hidden compartment under his bed. Inside was an ancient leather-bound book, its cover embossed with strange symbols. Jake's curiosity got the better of him, and he carefully opened the book. The pages were filled with handwritten notes and illustrations of bizarre rituals and otherworldly creatures. The language was old, but he could make out enough to understand that it described a way to open a portal to another dimension. Late that night, unable to resist the temptation, Jake decided to perform one of the simpler rituals. He followed the instructions meticulously, chanting the strange words and arranging the symbols on the floor around his bed. As he finished the last chant, the room grew cold, and the air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. To Jake's astonishment, a shimmering dark portal opened beneath his bed. He stared into the swirling void, feeling a strange pull. Gathering his courage, he crawled under the bed and stepped through the portal, driven by a mix of fear and excitement. On the other side, Jake found himself in a nightmarish world. The sky was a sickly green, and the landscape was twisted and barren. He could hear distant screams and the rustling of unseen creatures. Jake realized he had made a terrible mistake, but there was no turning back now. As Jake ventured deeper into this horrifying dimension, he encountered terrifying creatures, monstrous beings with elongated limbs and gaping maws. He had to use all his wits to avoid them, hiding behind jagged rocks and sprinting through dark tunnels. The book had mentioned something about a key to returning, but Jake had no idea where to find it. Days turned into weeks, and Jake grew weaker. He found scraps of food and water, but the constant fear and lack of sleep took their toll. Just when he was about to give up, he stumbled upon a decayed ancient temple. Inside, he found a pedestal with a glowing crystal, the key to his escape. Jake grabbed the crystal, feeling a surge of hope. But as he turned to leave, the ground shook, and the temple began to collapse. He raced through the crumbling corridors, narrowly avoiding falling debris. Just as he reached the exit, a monstrous creature blocked his path. Summoning his last ounce of strength, Jake hurled the crystal at the creature. The impact created a blinding flash of light, and the creature disintegrated. Jake seized the opportunity and ran back towards the portal, clutching the crystal tightly. Jake leaped through the portal just as it began to close. He landed on the floor of his bedroom, gasping for breath. The room was exactly as he had left it, but he felt different, older, wiser, and deeply scarred by his experience. He closed the book and locked it away, vowing never to open it again. The house seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, as if it, too, was glad to be free of the dark dimension. Jake spent the next few days recovering, grateful to be alive and back in the real world. Though Jake had returned home, he was forever changed by his journey. He had faced unimaginable horrors and survived, emerging stronger and more resilient. He knew he could never share his experience with anyone. They would think he was crazy. But he didn't mind. The knowledge that he had faced the unknown and lived to tell the tale was enough. Jake sealed the hidden compartment under his bed and covered it with heavy furniture, ensuring it would never be opened again. He resumed his studies, finding comfort in the mundane routines of daily life. The nightmares gradually faded, replaced by a quiet determination to live fully and fearlessly. In the end, the portal had shown Jake a glimpse of the darkness that lurked just beyond the veil of reality. But it had also shown him the strength of his own spirit, and that was a gift he would carry with him always. Lily had always loved dolls. Her collection filled the shelves of her small apartment, each one meticulously cared for and displayed. Her friends and family often gifted her dolls on special occasions, knowing how much she adored them. One day, Lily received an anonymous package containing a rare antique doll. The doll was beautiful but unsettling, with porcelain skin, glassy eyes, and a slightly sinister smile. Its dress was old-fashioned, adorned with intricate lace and embroidery. Despite its eerie appearance, Lily was thrilled and immediately added it to her collection. That night, Lily had trouble sleeping. She felt as though she was being watched. She dismissed it as paranoia and eventually drifted off. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Objects in her apartment were mysteriously moved, and she heard faint giggling when no one else was around. One morning, Lily woke to find the doll in a different position than where she had left it. Its head was turned, and its eyes seemed to follow her as she moved about the room. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was just her imagination. Lily decided to investigate the doll's origins. She took it to an antique shop, where the owner, Mrs. Palmer, was knowledgeable about such items. Mrs. Palmer's eyes widened in horror when she saw the doll. "This doll, it's cursed," Mrs. Palmer whispered. She explained that the doll had belonged to a young girl named Margaret, who had died under mysterious circumstances. Margaret's spirit was said to have been trapped inside the doll, seeking vengeance for her untimely death. Lily felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't believe in curses, but the strange occurrences in her apartment were becoming harder to ignore. Mrs. Palmer advised her to get rid of the doll, but Lily was hesitant. Despite everything, she felt a strange connection to it. The nights grew more disturbing. The giggling became louder, and Lily often woke to find the doll in different places, its smile appearing more malicious. One night she heard whispers and saw shadows moving in the dim light. She finally accepted that the doll was haunted. Desperate for help, Lily contacted a paranormal investigator, Daniel. He agreed to visit her apartment and assess the situation. As soon as he entered, he felt a dark presence. He set up cameras and audio equipment to capture any paranormal activity. That night, Lily and Daniel stayed up, watching the footage from the cameras. Around midnight, they saw the doll move on its own, its head turning and its eyes glowing eerily. A cold breeze swept through the room, and they heard a faint voice calling for help. Daniel conducted a séance, hoping to communicate with Margaret's spirit. They learned that Margaret had been wronged by a family member and had died in a fit of rage and sorrow. Her spirit was trapped in the doll, unable to find peace. Daniel explained that to free Margaret's spirit, they needed to find her unmarked grave and give her a proper burial. Lily and Daniel searched the records and eventually located the grave in an old, forgotten cemetery. They performed a cleansing ritual at the grave, placing the doll on top of the soil. As they recited the incantations, the ground trembled and a ghostly figure appeared. It was Margaret, looking sad and lost. With tears in her eyes, Lily spoke to her. "Margaret, you are free now. You can rest in peace." The figure nodded slowly, a look of relief washing over her face. She faded away, and the doll crumbled to dust. The air grew still, and a sense of calm settled over the cemetery. Lily returned home, feeling a weight lifted from her shoulders. Her apartment felt different, warmer and brighter. She knew Margaret's spirit had finally found peace. The strange occurrences stopped, and Lily resumed her life with a newfound appreciation for the quiet moments. She continued to collect dolls, but was more cautious about their origins. The experience had changed her, making her more aware of the unseen forces that sometimes lingered in the world. She kept a small, framed photo of Margaret on her shelf, a reminder of the young girl who had been wronged and the power of compassion and understanding. Lily's collection grew, but she never forgot the lessons she had learned. Each doll was a piece of history, and some histories were more haunting than others. But with respect and care, even the darkest spirits could find peace. Story 6. The Hissing Under the Bed. Derek and Emily had just moved into their dream home, a charming cottage on the outskirts of a small town. It was perfect for starting their family, with its large garden and cozy interior. They spent their first few weeks unpacking and settling in, delighted with their new life. One evening, after a long day of unpacking, Emily heard a faint hissing sound coming from their bedroom. She assumed it was the wind and ignored it. But over the next few nights, the hissing grew louder and more persistent. Derek suggested it might be a snake, and they searched the room thoroughly, but found nothing. The hissing continued to intensify, making it difficult for Emily to sleep. She felt a growing sense of unease and began to dread nighttime. One night, she woke up to find Derek sitting up in bed, his eyes wide with fear. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. The hissing had become a series of whispers, unintelligible but distinctly human. They decided to call an exterminator, thinking there might be some kind of animal trapped in the walls. The exterminator searched the house thoroughly, but found no signs of pests. He suggested they might be dealing with something else, something beyond his expertise. Desperate for answers, Derek and Emily began researching the history of their home. They discovered that the previous owner, an elderly woman named Agnes, had died in the house under mysterious circumstances. Neighbors whispered that Agnes had been a recluse, rumored to practice dark rituals and witchcraft. Emily found an old diary hidden in the attic, filled with Agnes's ramblings about voices and shadows. The last entry was particularly disturbing. "They are coming for me. I can hear them under the bed. The whispers grow louder every night. I don't have much time." Realizing they were dealing with something supernatural, Derek and Emily contacted a paranormal investigator named Lydia. Lydia arrived with her team and set up equipment to monitor the house overnight. They captured strange sounds and shadowy figures on their cameras, but the most disturbing evidence was the hissing and whispering from under the bed. Lydia explained that the house was likely a portal to another realm, a place where dark spirits lingered. Agnes's rituals might have opened the portal, and now the spirits were trapped between worlds, seeking a way out. Lydia suggested a cleansing ritual to close the portal and banish the spirits. Derek and Emily were hesitant, but knew they had no other choice. They gathered in the bedroom, following Lydia's instructions to the letter. Candles were lit, herbs were burned, and Lydia began chanting in an ancient language. As the ritual progressed, the hissing grew louder, and the room filled with an oppressive darkness. Shadows danced on the walls, and the temperature dropped. Emily felt a cold hand brush against her ankle and stifled a scream. The climax of the ritual was intense. Lydia demanded that the spirits leave, shouting over the cacophony of whispers and hisses. The shadows coalesced into a dark figure standing at the foot of the bed, its eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Derek and Emily held hands, their hearts pounding. Lydia's chanting reached a fever pitch, and the figure began to dissolve, its form breaking apart like smoke. With a final deafening hiss, the figure vanished, and the room was plunged into silence. The house felt different in the aftermath of the ritual. The air was lighter, and the oppressive feeling had lifted. Derek and Emily slept soundly for the first time in weeks, no longer plagued by hisses and whispers. Lydia stayed in touch, checking in on them to ensure the spirits hadn't returned. She explained that the portal had been closed, and the spirits were unlikely to bother them again. Derek and Emily were grateful but still cautious, maintaining a healthy respect for the unseen forces that had once haunted their home. As they continued to settle into their new life, Derek and Emily never forgot their ordeal. They kept Agnes's diary as a reminder of the house's dark history and the power of the unknown. Their dream home was once again a place of peace and happiness, but they knew they would always be vigilant, listening for the faintest hint of a hiss in the night.